Testing, testing, 1, 2, 1, 2. That works. Fantastic. Well, hello, everyone. It's great to have you all here this evening. I'd like to start by saying a quick thank you to our marketing manager, Carla, and to the AI Campus for helping us host this event. I think the proof is in the pudding. There's so many people here tonight, so great job, and thank you so much. As personally, for me, just great to see so many people interested in the topic that's so close to my heart. So my name's Sam King, and I'll be wearing 3 hats for you tonight. The first hat I'll be wearing is as the co-founder and CTO of Briink Intelligence. We're a climate tech company based here on the wonderful AI campus. We started just over a year ago on the insight that one of the biggest barriers to the climate transition is actually having the right data and insights that we need to invest in truly sustainable projects. I mean, although climate change on the one hand is a physical problem, we need solutions for our energy system and for transport and for our houses and for what's on our plates. In another sense, it's also an information problem. Without having the right data to make sustainable decisions, it's very hard to know how we're going to fund the future effectively. And that's why at Briink, we are building NLP applications at the intersection of sustainable finance and regulations. In particular, we're really interested in how NLP can play a role in structuring this world of unstructured data. Environmental information doesn't live in databases yet. It lives in reports and documents and this whole messy world of unstructured information. And that's where natural language processing can really play a role. So whether it's from text classification to ChatGPT, we think that NLP will play a really critical role in helping to give us the right data and insights to make sustainable decisions. So at Briink, we're on a mission to help move 1 trillion euros of investment into truly sustainable projects by 2032 and to provide the data and insights that we need to do that. So this is also the point where I make the shameless hiring pitch. We're hiring. If you're a back-end engineer or an NLP wizard or a sales guru, we'd really love to hear from you. However, we really do need the best and the brightest minds to help try and solve the climate crisis. So whether it's at Briink or in any other capacity, I really, really encourage you to all think about how, if you could work in this space and be part of climate solutions. I mean, in particular, the intersection of NLP and climate tech is a very small community at the moment. I can probably name most of the people involved in it by name, and we'd all fit on a small bus. So I think the other goal of this event is really to help grow that community. And that's why I come to you tonight as also a core member of Climate Change AI, which is, skip through this, which is a nonprofit focused on the intersection of climate and AI in general and helping to capitalize artificial intelligence projects that can help accelerate solutions to climate change. And I would suggest, everyone interested in the topic today to check them out and to see how you might get involved yourself. So third and finally, the hat I'm also wearing tonight is as your humble event moderator. And it's with that I would love to introduce our program for tonight. So we're going to start with three speakers on the topic of NLP and climate tech. And I think they're going to be amazing presentations, and I'm really excited to hear about them. After that, we're going to bring all the speakers up to have a panel discussion to further discuss topics around NLP and climate tech, and also how we can help grow this nascent community. And finally, we'll open the floor to you, our lovely audience. For those of us joining online today, please feel free to post your questions in the chat. And for those of you in person, we'll hope to get round to as many of you as possible. And for those of you lucky enough to be here in person tonight, I would also encourage everyone to stick around afterwards. We'll have some drinks and some pizza, I believe. So yeah, would love to continue the conversation about this topic. Right, so, well, my final task then is to introduce our great speakers for tonight. We have Julia from ETH Zurich, who will be talking about her great work with ClimateBERT. We have Anne from 2 Degree Investing Initiative here in Berlin, who's going to talk about NLP applications in sustainable finance. And last but not least, we have our own resident in-house Johannes from Merantix Momentum, who will be talking about some of the environmental implications of large language models. So yeah, with that, with no further ado, I'd love to hand over to Julia. We'd love to hear about your work. A big round of applause, everyone. Yeah. So it's on, you just need to hold it.
All right, yeah. Hi, everyone. Happy to see so many faces today. It's great to be here. Thanks a lot for the invite. Thanks a lot, Sam, for the fantastic organization and the team. Yeah, so basically speaking of hats, ETH is one of the hats that I don't wear today because I finished my PhD last year at ETH and I was then transitioning to University of Oxford and I work at the same time at the Council on Economic Policies, which is a think tank based in Zurich. So I wear 2 hats, not 3, sorry. Yeah, and I would love to talk to you about the work and especially the applications and the potential of an algorithm that we trained starting almost 4 years ago. So, which is called ClimateBERT. It's based on the BERT architecture. I think many of you might be somehow familiar with the BERT models themselves. They have been out for a while. I will not talk too much or at all about the technicalities and the details. I would rather talk about why this is useful and why it could be exciting to work in that area. So we trained this model to analyze corporate climate disclosures because, as Sam said, the information that you need at the moment is usually widely scattered around, mostly in reports, mostly in terms of you have a lot of words and you need to identify the information that you want to get there. There have been a lot of initiatives around for the past years on improving the availability of climate-related information from companies, from corporates. One of them is in terms of disclosures, the so-called TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures Initiative. But at the same time, there's also initiatives like the Climate Action 100+, where investors are basically teaming up in order to encourage individual companies and to push them to set so-called science-based targets, amongst others, and engage in climate-related strategies and set themselves ambitious targets that enable us to achieve the climate goals. And third, as already indicated, there's initiatives like the Science-Based Targets Initiative, which work on what information is needed and what steps are required at the individual company level in order to set KPIs, targets, strategies to achieve the global climate goals. Having observed this more or less dynamic sphere of initiatives popping up in both the corporate world, the scientific world, policymaking and finance, we started to ask ourselves, okay, but are these effective? So, for example, if a company starts to support the TCFD, which has been just to sign up online, does it actually really improve the availability of the information on their corporate metrics and targets, risk management, strategy and governance in terms of climate issues? Or is it more just cheap talk? Like there's no cost to it. I can say I support it, but I don't follow it. And the reason why this information or exactly this question has been very important back in the days when we started the project is that many financial supervisors from the legislative perspective said, oh, great, we now have the TCFD, so information will improve and everything will be priced in, so no worries. And we were a bit skeptical about that assumption that just having the TCFD initiative itself really pushes company to disclose the information that's actually needed. So yeah, what did we do? Actually, we started to train a BERT model based on the individual components that we wanted to find out on the disclosures. So it's a sort of more or less simple classification task. What's simple is that if you have good data, it's simple. If you don't have good data and need to do the labeling yourself, it's not simple. So we spent 3 years on labeling the data to have high quality agreement. 5 people of us were doing the work in night shifts and day shift and over weekends. We labeled tons of paragraphs and sentences on whether we see climate-related content in a certain paragraph. That was the easy task. Then to review whether the sentiment of the information is basically opportunity-related, neutral, or risk-related. Third, to see whether it's a commitment for action. Fourth, to see whether this commitment is firm-specific. And fifth, also to which of the individual components of this TCFD, so-called onion that I've shown before, this information belongs to. Is it governance? Is it strategy? Is it risk management? Is it metrics and targets? So after having spent a lot of time on that, we applied it first to the TCFD supporters. So we downloaded the reports, also mostly by hand scraping because they are not publicly available. I think people of you working with annual reports know about the issue. We downloaded the reports for those companies that publicly supported the TCFD to understand, did they, after having supported the TCFD, increase the amount of information that was available? And actually what we found is that here we see on an aggregate level 4,000 annual reports analyzed of more than 800 TCFD firms for the years 2015 until 2020. In 2017, the TCFD recommendations were launched, and the supporters did not necessarily increase the information as much as was expected. They rather just reshuffled the information that has already been there before. So we did not see a considerable increase in what was expected, basically, more decision useful information for financiers to price in risks. That was one of the core findings, and which sort of hit the industry a bit, because they were all saying like, yeah, if we have those reports, I mean, in the end, yeah, the information will be priced in and no need for mandatory requirements. Based on this analysis, many supervisors called us and said like, oh, maybe we should go for mandatory disclosures at some point. And like, yeah, probably would make sense. So that was one of the first analysis that we did. Second is then we analyzed or we constructed based on the data that we had the so-called GPOC index, which is the amount of information of commitments which is precise over total commitments, because there's many things you could commit to without being really precise and also without being eventually held accountable for not achieving the target because it's so imprecise. And what we were then able to do is for more than 14,000 annual reports of the MSCI World Index, which is one of the largest indices for equities for more than 10 years, we assessed how do the companies basically commit to climate-related targets. Do they improve in the specificity of their commitments? And do we see certain patterns across different sectors on the left-hand side or across different regions? And we have, for example, a huge difference between the energy sector and the financial sector, and also between Europe and the United States. And that's usually close or related to Europe and the United States related to the regulation, but between energy and financials, it's also just related to the mere fact that energy had to be active also for much longer already before. And last, before going further, Can you switch the slides for me? Sorry, I think it doesn't work. Thank you. And last, what we analyzed as well is whether being one supporter of TCFD or having committed to set a science-based target or being one of the target companies of the Climate Action 100 Plus actually is associated with higher or lower cheap talk. And this cheap talk or this analysis has been important because many people in the industry, in the financial industry, consider being a TCFD supporter or being a company that has committed to set science-based targets an indicator for better climate performance, sometimes at least better climate risk management. So what we found is that actually being the only indicator that was associated with a reduction in cheap talk was being a company that's targeted by the investor engagement in the Climate Action 100 Plus. Setting a science-based target or committing to set a science-based target was not statistically significantly associated with the indicator only when considered lagged. So in the year before, if you committed, then in the year after, your disclosures became more precise. And most striking, what the TCFD didn't like at all is if you're a TCFD supporter, we find consistently across all samples and across all our analysis that it's associated with more cheap talk. So yeah, basically that was how we sort of tried to use NLP to challenge a bit the industry. And I think it worked pretty well. And it's one of the reasons why it's really exciting to work in that area.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Julia. So now from research into industry, I'd love to hand over to Anne from 2DII. Yeah, really excited to hear about your talk.
Thanks, Sam. All right, okay. Very nice to be here. And also from my side, a big thank you, Sam and Carla, for this very nice organization of this event. My name is Anna. I'm the project lead of one of our main projects at the 2 Degrees Investing Initiative at the moment. And we are building up a climate database for SMEs. I will also not go into big technologies and stuff, but more focus on the overall impact and how you use NLP in a bit more basic form as ClimateBERT, but yeah. So before I start about NLP and TILT, so the project that I'm working for, just very quickly, what is the 2 Degrees Investing Initiative? And I think that's just important also for you that you understand a bit better where I'm coming from. So the 2 Degrees Investing Initiative has the mission to align capital flows with climate goals. And we are a pretty small team, so we are only like 15 people, really more focusing on how to translate research into tangible products for the financial industry. So it's very much software-based solutions. We are building metrics, we're building this climate database, and it's really in this intersection between research and the financial industry. And one thing that we are also really looking forward and also proud of is that everything what we do, we try to do open source, and we also publish like on GitHub. So with this climate database that I will show you in a minute, it's in the prototype phase, so it's not on GitHub yet, but you can still check out like other stuff that we do as well. Okay, now coming to TILT and the problem that we actually wanted to solve with TILT. So Julia was already speaking about like that there is so much unstructured information about like different listed and large companies. However, there is actually no data at the moment about SMEs, and it's very hard to assess SMEs and like non-listed companies. So we have like information about annual reports or financial reports and large companies and listed companies, but we do not have those information on SMEs. However, what we still think that SMEs are actually a crucial part of like transitioning to a low carbon economy. And so what we try to solve is really to find this data and utilize the data in a way that we actually can do some climate assessments. And this is really important because only then like banks actually have the chance maybe to also finance mitigation and adaptation measures for those SMEs as well. And then another thing that we found like critical, and I also want to stress today a bit, is that like those methodologies and metrics that are out there are sometimes also not very clear in their assumptions, or they are like pretty black box models. And that's also something that we really wanted to solve and want to do different now with this project here. So coming now to Tilt, I put here on the slides like 5 deliverables that we want to achieve throughout the whole program. And that's first like the Tilt data and the indicators, and I will focus on those 2 today and tell you also a bit about like how we actually gathered this data, how we also created the indicators to assess SMEs with regard to climate and with regard to their sustainability profiles and climate-related risks. But I also wanted to show you like 3 more deliverables today, because we also think that beyond this data and beyond collecting data and assessing SMEs, it's also very important to kind of understand like what are the climate action points and how banks or the financial institutions can actually utilize the information to drive the transition, right? So, of course, we first need to measure and we first need to understand something about the SMEs and their climate profiles, but then afterwards what's happening. So that's why we also have like standardized questionnaire where banks can also collect more data, make a better assessment. We have like this climate action points where banks can then also be involved with their clients to understand a bit better about their adaptation and mitigation measures that they want to take. And the last point is also like coming more from an opportunity perspective. So giving like loan officers also the opportunity of financing also green activities. And yes, so we work mainly with banks. So at the moment we have 12 user groups. And the methodology and the metrics are also developed with those banks. And then in the end, we want them that they can use all the deliverables that you can see here for identifying climate risks, understanding sustainability profiles better, and also reporting. And now I will only talk about the Tilt data and Tilt indicators, because here we also used some NLP. So how do we create this database? So what we do, so we have actually now 5 steps that we are actually undertaking at the moment. So the first step was that we web scraped data from companies. We now have 280,000 companies web scraped from 5 countries. It's a European funded project. So now those countries are mainly in Europe. Then we pre-process the data. So we have like 5 data points about those SMEs, like the company name, the activity, their sector, their products that they are producing, and the main activity. We, in the third step, then match those clean data points with other databases, like life cycle inventory databases or physical risk heat maps, and utilize the web scrape data. Just utilize it and match it also with climate data. And then in the fourth step, calculate climate indicators. And at the moment, we have 8 ones conceptually developed. And then at the moment, we are also starting our road testing. So now we have 7 European banks who actually road test those metrics and those indicators and data. And now coming to how we use NLP, and I put in parentheses basic NLP, because you can imagine like we web scrape products and activities. So we do not have like lots of information and lots of unstructured text. However, NLP really helps us in the pre-processing phase. So when we pre-process the data, when it comes to typos, when it comes to harmonization, language detection, and also fuzzy duplication. And then also in this matching with other data sources. So to really match like one database with the other database, here we also use like string matching. And coming also to the discussion later on, I just wanted to mention like 3 main challenges already that we face. So the first one is that we still have lots of manual work involved. So, I mean, yeah, Julia also mentioned that you spent like 3 years on just the labeling process. And for us, it's still like also really kind of like the trade-off between automatization and securing data quality. And then the second thing is how to communicate transparently. So if we tell the banks that we use NLP, then it's always like, okay, what exactly are you doing there? And then the last one, how to prevent like black box models, because yes, we are open source, but the question is just, even though the code is open, do people actually understand what we are doing there? Okay, so I just wanted to quickly also show you the wonderful team on which we are doing this. And Mirja and Tilman are also here. Mirja is our data scientist and Tilman is also one of our analysts. And if you stick around, then I'm sure that they also want to chat with you afterwards. All right, that was about it. And I'm really happy and really excited about the discussion later on as well.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Anne. And now, last but not least, we have Johannes to talk about some of the environmental implications of large language models. So our wildcard presentation for tonight.
All right. Thanks, Sam. And thank you, everyone, for being here and for Sam and Carla for organizing the event. Super excited to be here. I'm slightly switching gears to my previous speakers because now I'm going to talk into the technical parts of the presentation and not so much about the application of it. But I'm really excited to see actually applications of all the algorithms and stuff that I'm developing on my everyday basis and see them in action and see that they make an impact. The idea of my talk is essentially to talk about what the energy costs of using NLP techniques are. Because if you're talking about sustainability, you should also think about like what's the impact that you leave behind when you're using these technologies to actually report on sustainability. As we'll see, it's actually kind of an intricate topic and not quite straightforward. But first, let me talk about LLMs and briefly touch upon why they're such a big deal right now. As you know, probably by now, ChatGPT came out a few months ago. It's one of the most recent large language models that is out there, based on a foundation model. There's many, many more out there. There's Bloom, which is a European-based model. Then Google also has a bunch of models here. Palm, there's also one of OpenAI, of Meta AI, OPT. And then the whole revolution was really started in about 2019 with OpenAI's GPT-3. So they're typically NLP models based on deep learning techniques. They have billions of parameters, really, really many, a really, really big data set, puts all into a GPU memory, and they're trained on trillions of words or tokens. And that's really what they're about. And the performance and the power of these models really is in the number of parameters and the number of words that you're doing. We already start to see real world impact of these big language models. So it's really important to think about the sustainability of these models. As you can see, there's people claiming that ChatGPT will end coding. Not quite convinced of that, but people are saying this. It triggers school boards and educators to just stop anything of using the internet in schools. It has impact on publication policies in academic journals. They're strictly ranking down on not using any kind of language models. They start to be able to take the bar exam. So these models already have capabilities beyond what we can, what we would have guessed a few years ago. And I just found like one interesting graph here, just for using OpenAI. Then there's a publicly available data straight from HT Insights that are trying to figure out like where are these language models used in which kind of industries. And you can see there's a range of industries. So I'm not going through all of them, but you can see there's a huge number of companies starting to use these models. So they're going to be staying around. They're here, and we have to deal with their impact. So what are these language models? And fundamentally, there are nothing else than what's called a transformer model. And here I'm going to tell you a little bit what a transformer is in a nutshell. First, I asked DALL-E what a transformer in a nutshell is. That's what I came up with. But what is it really? It's essentially nothing else than a model that we call autoregressive, where you put in one word, and based on the one word, you're trying to predict the next word. And then the next word can pay attention to all of the previous words, and you're trying to predict the next word. So it's really just like the next word predicting, or for in case of DALL-E, the next pixel prediction. So this is really all what it is. And then you use this mechanism, scale it up to like a huge number of parameters, and you're trying to train it on trillions of words, and then you essentially arrive at ChatGPT. There's a few more tricks, but that's the basic principle. Why it is such a big deal is because you can predictably tell what the performance improvement is as a size of the scale of the data set and the number of parameters. So this is something that we're typically doing in machine learning. We're looking at a test loss where we just like take a specific type of task or another data set, and we're trying to predict how well does a model do on a holdout data set. And the lower the numbers, the better the model is. And what you can see on the x-axis here is essentially a proxy for the amount of resources that we put into these models. And as we increase the amount of resources, the performance of these models gets better and better and better, and predictably so. So if we know what we want to achieve and which kind of performance we want to achieve, we can use these graphs, know exactly what kind of resources we need, and then we can make a model of our liking. This is what is such a big deal, and that's why people start really scaling these kind of things. And this is what came out here. This is when you take a look at a few publicly available data set tracks, the databases where people track the number of parameters of these models that are coming out over time. And you can see here, there is a very significant increase over time. So on the x-axis, there's the years. On the y-axis is the number of parameters in log scale. So this is an exponential increase. That's why I put it on log scale, because otherwise you wouldn't see it. And you can see that there is a steady increase from the lower left to the top right. And you see that most of the stuff is actually coming out of US-based companies, and some Chinese. They hold currently the record with Bugualu, something about like trillions of parameters. And we have a king somewhere in about 2021, where there is also like not much scaling going on beyond that. So we're reaching some kind of saturation limit. We don't really quite know on why, but we're seeing there's a saturation limit, but still a few people try to keep on pushing. Now, if you can imagine, if we have like trillions of parameters, these things just don't run on like your normal laptop anymore. So we can essentially try to estimate what we need in terms of energy for these models. And they are typically deployed in like a ginormous data center. And there's this very simple equation where the cost of your transformer is nothing else than the number of parameters in your model, this is n, and your number of tokens or words in your data set. And I can promise you this is the last equation and the only one that you will see in the whole talk. So bear with me a little bit in the math. But if you do that and you can plug in all of these parameters, you can get all of these things. You see that a model like Bloom, which is on the order of GPT-3, you can equate that this model takes about 138 kilowatt hours to train. And this is just like pure cost and application. And then if you go back and you do like an estimate like the Bloom paper did and Bloom people did, and you do a vice versa, you see that with this equation, we get to the right order of magnitude, because what they estimate, just looking at the counter on the data center, they get about 433 kilowatt hours to train this model. And so you see that just with this equation, you get like the order of magnitude, right, what it takes you to train these models. And that's quite a big computer. So I don't want to put this on my household bill. However, that is one part of the story. And the other part of the story is that, of course, computer scientists don't sleep. We try to make better and better algorithms. And what we can see here is that over time, you're also seeing algorithmic improvements. And that's what you see here, is that over time, you also see a reverse scaling law and a reverse compute law. On the x-axis is time again. On the y-axis, you see the compute resources for different types of algorithms that are being trained to achieve a certain type of performance of models, and you see it's going down. So we are also getting better at designing more energy efficient algorithms that do the same stuff that we have before. So they're kind of competing exponentials, and we're not quite sure where we come out yet, but right now the scaling up of the models is winning. Now, I told you a little bit about the energy that is needed to train these models. But you also saw there's still a factor of 4 difference between the equation and what people actually measured. And that's due to the fact that you also have to take into account the full model lifecycle emissions. I'm not going to go through like the whole development cycle, but there are several stages like data processing, the development, the scaling, the fine tuning, the model production cycle, and also on. So really you have the full model lifecycle that is costing energy. And you have storage and CPUs that you need. You have to do the iteration of the model development several times. The adaptation, again, takes a lot of compute power. You have to do the inference and the customer-facing internet connections. And so really what you see is like there's a whole lot of things that are going on. But the good part about this is that these language models are only developed in the model scaling part. And once you have it scaled, then these fine-tuning steps are really, really cheap. So you only pay this big cost once, and then they amortize over time. So you really want to train a very powerful model that you then can amortize over time. So now you start to see why really assessing the sustainability and the energy impact of these models becomes really complicated, because to estimate what these amortization times and costs are is really tricky. Moreover, what I haven't really included yet is also the data center costs. So you also need to store them somewhere. You need to run them somewhere. It depends on what kind of energy your data center runs on, whether or not it's a new data center or an old data center. So what is the power usage efficiency and all this kind of stuff. So what Bloom also did, which is really nice, they tried to figure out like what is the energy equivalent of Bloom in the inference mode. And they say like it's about like 19 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent per day, just to give you a rough estimate. And that's an average new car that you drive for 54 miles. That's about 80 kilometers a day. Now, with all these numbers, it's a little bit tricky to figure out like what does that actually mean? Like why is it such a big deal? And why am I bringing this up? Because people are trying to argue that it's really costly to train these big language models. And we shouldn't really do that, and we should stay small in scale. But it helps me to think about like what are other big energy consumers. And there was a study coming out of Sweden trying to figure out like what is the carbon footprint of 1 kilometer of highway in Sweden. And you see that it's about 1,400 tons of carbon dioxide equivalents per kilometer. So this is a huge number compared to what we have in these kind of language models. And I also want to remind everyone that language models are essentially like a platform technology, because we can fine tune them, we can use them and reuse them over time. And they are starting to be infrastructure. And in the US, people are already thinking about like using these technologies as infrastructure. And that's how we should frame it, because nobody will train large language models on an everyday basis. There are only a few of them. There are really software components. And that's why we should think about them. And that's why I want to remind everyone that we should rethink technology as an infrastructure and not just as a one-off cost. So this is my last slide. Key takeaways that I want you to take away. Large language models are transformer-based neural networks, not the Optimus Prime kind, but like the software kind. They're becoming really a platform technology, and they're critical infrastructure for our economy. That's a really important key takeaway here. The CO2 equivalent estimation is really complicated. So whenever you see numbers in the papers and or newspapers, really critically ask like what's the actual lifetime amortization costs in here. That is not quite as trivial. Just training the model doesn't really give you the full footprint and the full picture. And just to give you a few numbers to take away, the Swedish highway is about 1,400 tons of CO2 equivalents per kilometer. The Bloom training, just like the training, the big model was only 25 tons of CO2 equivalent. So it's significantly cheaper than a kilometer of highway. And now the question is, what is more important economically? Is it like 1 kilometer of highway, or is it a big foundation model? Because like those are also like economic drivers. And fundamentally, or finally, I'm not going to give a good pitch as Sam did, but we're also hiring, so check it out. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Johannes. I think that last point is also really interesting in the context of this evening, thinking about not just the energy costs and CO2 costs of large language models, but potentially the downstream uses of them too. If they can be used to help us accelerate and solve some of our biggest climate challenges, then what's also the positive impact they can have. So thank you all again to the speakers. That was so interesting. We're going to move now to the panel part of this evening. So I'd like to ask you to come and stand. Well, these chairs are a bit not well arranged. If you come take a seat here. So I think the first thing I wanted to ask was actually a question to Julia. I think one of the really interesting implications about your work with ClimateBERT is the implication that there's some specific challenges around training models for the emerging language around sustainability and climate. And I wondered if you could talk a bit about what the specific challenges with climate and sustainability text and language are. And I will give you a microphone to do that.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I mean, depending on the subtopic you're working on climate, sustainability, language, there's different challenges, I would say. One of the core challenges that we faced in the context of corporate climate disclosures was the availability of sufficiently high quality data, like real world examples of what we actually aim for. Because we trained the model on real world data, not on like generated data. And in the end, since this topic has only been like scaling up since 2017, the availability of sufficient specific climate commitments, especially, has been a challenge in the language of NL reports. So we have seen some data providers and some self-reporting initiatives like CDP and so on, like people working in the field know them, who have sentences and also language sentences, not only figures as targets reported. Still, the language differs a lot from what we saw in the TCFD disclosures. That was one key challenge. And another one, I think, is it's not only unstructured data, it's also unstructured information to some extent. So we had to come up with labeling guidelines that are consistent across a ton of different industries, areas. And these labeling guidelines, in the end, like the most important parts were always the ones where we disagreed, like amongst the five of us. So, because that helped the algorithm understand the decision boundary. But that was obviously a lot of work.
Amazing, thank you. And I encourage anyone on the panel, I'll largely direct questions to specific people, but if you have thoughts, insights, epiphanies, then feel free to just dive in. Maybe over to Anne next. I think your work at 2D.ai with some of the applications of NLP, especially to helping banks assess SMEs, is super interesting. But how can people spot other potential new use cases of NLP that could have an impact on accelerating the climate transition?
Yeah, no, I think this is a really good question. And I think so. I mean, like NLP is really good in like pre-processing data and collecting data and really trying to make sense of all the unstructured information that is out there. And I think now in the climate space, there will be more and more information coming with regard to, we also have like some requirements that will come up for specific companies to disclose their data. So I think there will be there will be just an increase of data and information available. So I think NLP will be having here like a very high potential and also some more use cases. The only question mark that I actually have with NLP is still like, how do we go beyond this data collection? So we do collect this information. We now can assess companies, but what does it actually mean then? And I think this is really important to also think about, okay, how can we turn this data into climate action, and how can we accelerate then also the transition, in the sense that then banks or the financial institutions decide also to fund green companies or finance mitigation adaptation measures. So I see like that there will be lots of use cases, and I think it can be it will have a high potential. But then again, like the question of action and the question of like turning this data into real transition, I think this is like still a question mark that I do have.
Yeah, no, thank you. Oh, Johannes, do you want to go?
Maybe I have in addition to that, which I think is a great idea, and I could encourage everyone to actually play with AI and NLP. Only if you play with it, you are going to be creative enough to come up with new use cases. Right now, most of the time with these new models, the capabilities and the use cases that we come up with are limited by our own creativity and thinking. And only if you play with it, you actually discover new use cases and new ideas of like how to use these models, because they're extremely powerful. And so far in my day-to-day life, I have not come up with a single task that with a little bit of creativity I couldn't solve with these models. So that should tell you something about like the potential of these technologies. And these are just like the beginnings, and I'm super excited to see where this is going to go.
Amazing. You actually provided me a perfect segue into my next question, which was for you. I think probably everyone in this room in some capacity or another has heard about ChatGPT over the last weeks, which is fundamentally an NLP technology at its core. And I was interested in the panel's take on what the potential use cases and impacts for climate could be for a technology like ChatGPT.
Yeah, this is a good question. On the one hand, I'm super impressed by ChatGPT, despite it being extremely verbose. Whenever you ask the question, it answers you with 2 paragraphs. But ultimately, I do think that systems like ChatGPT, not ChatGPT yet, but systems like it, will give you a new way to search for information. If you think about training such a model on an internal knowledge base of a company, and using it as a natural language inference system for surfacing information that is, for example, in a big Jira system or other kinds of content management systems, it's going to be really powerful to interact in a natural process with it and surface information from different pages and from different parts of your business. And I think this will fundamentally reshape the way how, for example, business analysts can involve their own business or analyze their own business, because right now they're really dependent on the software engineers, on BI analysts, on data scientists to resurface the information. But once you can start to poke the internal knowledge base and have systems like ChatGPT, you will be able to generate the answers, or at least like surfaces of the answers much more quickly and much more easily. And then you can go into a targeted search much more quickly. Does that happen tomorrow? Probably not. But my guess is within the next couple of years, we will see early systems of that arising. And I'm excited to have these new search interfaces here.
Amazing. Maybe on that topic, a question to Julia. Are there any other research areas or topics in NLP that you're excited about that could have an impact on climate change?
So what we've seen so far is that exactly ChatGPT is really useful to extract the information that's out there. And it enables you to understand which information is not out there yet as well. Because if you want to understand, okay, how far is a certain sector in decarbonization, or what are the key technologies, it gives you what is available. And I think what it enables you, if you then apply a bit of a creative thinking process, is to spot the gaps. Besides that, I agree with what you said on playing around is important, but also understanding, not only talking to those models, but also talking to people from completely different fields. It's important. So when we started ClimateBERT, that was basically just by coincidence. It was a seminar, a guy asked me what I'm doing. I said I work on climate, and he was like, yeah, I work on NLP. And I was like, oh, great, I don't have a clue about that. Can you tell me 2 sentences? And he was like, oh, great, I don't have a clue about climate. Can you tell me 2 sentences? And that's how this entire project started. So usually I don't think that AI can and NLP can solve any of those questions, but it could help us speed up the process a lot.
Thank you. One of the kind of interesting challenges I think that you talked about, Julia, was the issue of greenwashing, and maybe a question to Anne then. I think that many of you are aware that there's a lot of greenwashing or people making kind of unbased climate and sustainability claims in text data. How can we make sure that those sort of biases don't end up in NLP models, and how do you think about that problem specifically?
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good question. And my really short answer would be open source and trying to be as transparent as possible. And I think it's not only inherently related to NLP. I think we already see this, right? So if you see ESG scores from different providers, they don't correlate at all. So people are assessing like Tesla, for example, I don't know, giving them a really good score, another provider not giving them a really good score. And I think that's not a problem, because it's always also depending on the use case of how you actually use the metrics and the data and the indicators. But the assumptions, I think, are not 100% clear. And not so much understand also by banks and by the financial institutions. So what I think what we should do is really thinking about open source, open access, transparent assumptions, but also how to democratize the whole area in a way, right? So at the moment with Tilt, we work with banks together on the methodology and on the metrics, because we really want them to understand what they actually assess here. So that, for example, greenwashing is not happening as much as it was before. But the question is then, do we really just want to have banks there and discussing it with banks, or don't we also want to have researchers there, citizens? So shouldn't that be also a more democratic sphere? And here the question is how can we do this? And that also means that we have lots of coordination to do, and also get involved lots of people on those projects, because I think it matters how those metrics and how those scores are actually built. And it's also something that we shouldn't give away to the financial institutions or to any rating agencies to determine what is green and what is not green. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Also on that point, thinking about NLP applications that could actually help us there's some very interesting work about how you can use NLP to actually detect and assess greenwashing versus specific and actionable climate change. So I think both points make work. To Johannes, one slightly more provocative question, maybe as the NLP visionary. Will NLP steal climate analyst jobs, or will it enhance them?
A resounding no. AI technologies will not replace humans. There's historic data for that, but also fundamentally, AI is always intended as a tool to be used. It can augment and make you more efficient, and potentially also outsource some of the domain knowledge that you don't have. But it will fundamentally not replace your job, because it's fundamentally not possible. An AI is always trained on data that human produces, and so it can never be smarter than a human. It can be maybe faster, it can be more accurate in certain areas. But for now, for the foreseeable future, I don't see any kind of risk on that.
I think one of the interesting mega trends that we kind of see at Briink is that sustainability analysts and people who are literate in the space is kind of the new data scientist, in the sense of every company is trying to hire them as quickly as possible, because there's just simply not enough people in the labor market to do this work manually. So one of the applications I see of NLP is how do you let a sustainability analyst do the work of 10 to augment their work and make it faster and more efficient, because as it becomes a mainstream topic like financial auditing that every company needs to get on top of, having the tools to make it more scalable, I think is a really important application of NLP. So maybe we go to Julia again about how do you communicate NLP research in the climate community more effectively? I think one of the things that we see in CCAI is that trying to build that bridge between AI research and climate is a very big task and a very important one. How do you think about building the bridge at that intersection?
Yeah, I think CCAI is one of the best initiatives in that sense. I love them. So they're really great because they manage to basically understand the interest of different communities, and they are able to talk to both, or all of them. Like there's not just one climate and one AI community, as all of you should be aware, I guess. So in the end, it's basically a translation exercise. And it's an exercise to understand what do the people that I'm talking to need to know and what do they not need to know. And also what is basically the application, why using, for example, the ClimateBERT algorithm is useful for them, even if they do not necessarily understand every bit and piece. And also to take a bit of their fear of not understanding every bit and piece. I think it's great to have the common understanding that many people do not understand every bit and piece. Nobody understands every bit and piece in that sense. It just makes it more transparent. So before, people have been using certain data from certain databases, which have been extracted, for example, from annual reports, financial statements. And just because it was a single data point, they were basically relying on the data point and assuming, okay, that's the truth. What these models enable people to learn is also to think more in a probabilistic manner, and that's a core feature and a core asset you need in order to think about future transitions. So I think to some extent how these models work could also trigger a general shift in mindsets for the people working on the climate aspects themselves especially within corporates and at financial institutions. So yeah, I think talking to them about it's not talking only about it, but also with them on basically themselves, like triggering them to launch into a dialogue themselves with the methods. Yeah, that's probably one of the core tasks. Second, I have those double hats, so being on the one hand side close to practitioners, on the other hand side really close to academia. In academia, it's really, really, really tough. So people say like, oh, I don't get it, so you don't get published. So it's really fun to work in that space and also in the translation. But it's really, really, really hard to go to persuade people in finance journals that keyword-based approaches are less accurate than what we did, which is like everyone in computer science love it at this finding, but they just don't want to understand because it challenges their own work. So usually there's also personal issues involved if people don't want to understand what you do. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. So maybe a kind of two-part question here. We heard a lot about the also potential, environmental impacts of training large language models, and certainly it's something to take seriously. I wondered what people's perspectives were on two questions. One is, should we include environmental metrics alongside performance metrics when talking about model performance? And I guess a related question to that, do we have any ideas about how we could measure the potential environmental impact downstream, whether negatively or positively, of NLP applications?
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a really important point. We talked about that a lot within the ClimateBERT team. We also wrote a paper on climate aware AI and NLP. So explicitly not saying like we are able to assess the impact, as Johannes perfectly stated, like it's really, really tricky, but we also thought it's not necessarily the core thinking that we need. We don't need this final number that's 100% correct, but we need people who are aware of a certain impact and try to design the models accordingly. So, for example, using models in the training, if they're already pre-trained, and fine-tune them further, as you said, not only on the classification tasks, but also for us, we used the BERT architecture and didn't come up with a noun model ourselves. Second, then to deploy these models publicly. That's a core, as you said. Like if you do not go public with what you did, you could say, yeah, potentially it's lower in emissions in the downstream use, but it's not being used, so people need to replicate your work. I think these are the core elements, and we also designed model cards that could be used alongside the standard model performance cards to understand exactly what you said, the efficiency component. So not just the effectiveness, but also just relating what is my marginal addition in performance compared to the marginal addition in inputs, be it energy, be it whatever, that I need. And I think a third point that I want to raise in that context is the parameters are not, like, as you said, they tend to stagnate, probably. We also saw that in the end, depending on the use case, it's not necessarily the amount of parameter that's important, it's the cleanly labeled data. And I think that has been something that sort of started to trigger through in the community, that even if you have the perfect language model, it does not necessarily help if you don't have the cleanly labeled data for your downstream tasks. So people started to focus more and on the labeling, on the data gathering, but also on investing in experts who are able to provide clean data sets and high quality data sets. And there the analysts come back into place.
Amazing. And last question for you, Anne. What can people do to get more involved in the intersection of NLP and climate and find their own way to grow this community?
Yeah, I think like events like this help. So no, but yeah, I think it's really a matter of trying to bring as many people as possible to the table. And in the work that we do, that means like really trying to also think about who is kind of impacted about what we do. And so like also thinking about like getting SMEs now on the table and also discussing with them like what we actually do there. So yeah, it's just, I think, really about communication, about making it also public, what actually is what's going on in this field. And yeah, so I hope that events like this will actually continue also in the future. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you to everyone on the panel. What an interesting and insightful discussion about a topic that I love. So I definitely had a good time. We're going to go to the final part of the evening tonight to open up the floor to questions from you, the audience. If you do have a question here, just please raise your hand. I'll run around with this microphone. And we also, I think, have some questions from our online community, which is nearly 100 people, which is pretty amazing. So I think that if there's some questions there, the Briink team will take them and pass them on to the panel. So any questions? Oh, we got a live one.
Hello. On the topic of accuracy, I think Julia, you used it for analyzing these reports, right? And then you generated these graphs on what's cheap talk. And then Johannes, you also mentioned that, these transformer models could be used to, have them being trained on a company's knowledge base. And then, I can ask like a question, like, I don't know, about the company I'm working at. But I want to bring up one example just to throw a curveball to you, which is, like a Twitter user asked ChatGPT, what is the fastest marine mammal? And ChatGPT responded with, the fastest marine mammal is the peregrine falcon. This bird is actually not a mammal, but a seabird, and so on and so forth. And then, so I think the idea that many people are always like putting forth is that, okay, maybe we don't need to train these models on, just the data, but, maybe we can also make it possible where they can reference back to, like to, let's say, a paper on what is the fastest marine mammal or something like this. And for that, I also have an example where I asked a transformer model on u.com, and I asked basically, who am I? Like, I'm Tim, who am I? And it actually does this reference-based lookup. So it looked up a question that I answered on Stack Overflow, where I was like asking a really silly question of how to align the shadow of a div with CSS, and it actually interpreted that as Tim Daubenschütz is a German physicist who is known for his contributions on physics and so on. So long story for asking the question, like, how do you think this will get these like accuracy problems under control so that, we don't have to like double question everything like the output.
Right. Yeah, that's a perfect curveball. And it's also like, if I repeat my answer from before, I don't think that ChatGPT is the search interface now, exactly because of those reasons. There's a lot of work being done right now to incorporate external knowledge into these kind of transformer models. You are using fact-based knowledge graphs or databases in order to inject factual knowledge into these models. We don't know quite yet how to do that at scale. We know it at small systems, but it starts to work. But that's why I give it a few years. On the question of the reference-based lookup for UChat, the problem is tricky, right? Like OpenAI went the route of not giving the model access to the internet for a reason, because you don't know where it actually goes for. The open-ended generation problem is real, as you know, from GPT-3 with all of the misogyny, racism, and all the other kind of stuff. So if you give a model access to the internet, you don't know what it comes back with. And that can also be a risk. So we don't really know for sure what it happens. One thing that we should be aware of, though, is these models are real. They are starting to produce text on the internet. So any kind of future model will also work on this data set. So I don't think that fundamentally you will get around starting to question everything. And here I also want to make a final remark on this topic. This is not a new problem, because when you think back on photography, people thought like, great, photographs, we have now proof of reality, until Photoshop came around and we could Photoshop people in or out and we could change the story. So the fact that we have these kind of misinformation sources on the internet and available just means that you need to be more aware of that, and we should tell people about it. And that's why I'm also saying, like, bring these technologies into the hands of people, have them play with it, and educate people about them.
Thanks, Johannes. Is there any more? Oh, that's another one here. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks so much. First of all, wow, this is really interesting. Thank you. I really enjoyed the presentations and the talk. So my question is for Julia. It's a little bit geeky on sustainable finance. I am really thrilled to find out what you're going to do next, as we have, sort of a global baseline cooking for climate-related financial disclosure with the International Sustainability Standards Board. Are you going to be on their case? Are you cooperating with them? What are we to expect? Thank you.
So we will work on training ClimateBERT further to detect the information that will be required in different baseline disclosure frameworks. Although we explicitly refrain from the task of extracting numeric data, because we want to focus on the strategy parts, and namely on the net zero transition plans. So that will be one of the core tasks that we will look for, in contrast to ISSB, which is merely like ISSB, this disclosure framework that was referred to. They do not provide individual items on forward-looking information. They just say you need to disclose it and you need to disclose your assumptions. So providing a means to structure this information that will be available based on these individual points, that will be one of the further developments we're doing. Was that geeky enough? I tried to bridge the gap. Okay.
Amazing. We have a question from our online audience about whether the data sets for training ClimateBERT are public, and also if there are any other data sets that anyone in the panel is aware of for training NLP tasks related to climate that people could look into.
So the model ClimateBERT itself, for the language model, not the classification tasks, it's public. It's available on Hugging Face. We would love to make the classification tasks public as soon as possible. The issue is that we don't get published yet in the finance journals, and we need to wait until we get published. So if anyone in an A journal wants to publish us, the individual classification tasks will be available soon. Second, on the data sets, that's also a reason why the labeled data set for training the classification tasks is not available yet. We want to make it public afterwards, but we have some sort of a second data set, which is an environmental claims data set, which is publicly available and can be used. So yeah, but it's not as sophisticated, I would say, as the climate one.
Thank you so much. I think we have another question here from the audience, so take it away.
And my question is, what exactly is the climate tech? Do you think it's just we compare with the regulations of our actions to see if we align with their decisions? But this one is actually not innovation. How do you think of this? And we are using NLPs. We are just using what we are exactly doing now to see if we align with their regulations. It's not innovation. It's not doing anything.
All right, we've got a spicy one.
Yeah, no. No, but I think that comes also back to what I just mentioned before, right? So what I said also was, yes, so NLP is super great and enhance so much sustainability analyst tasks that we do, but it's still data and it's still nothing to do with like the climate action that's then coming afterwards, right? So what you are referring to with alignment, yes, we have like those regulations. And when we work now with those banks, they are mostly interested in what we do because they want to report on it, right? So there are reporting requirements and they need the data to report, but it's not that much about, okay, that they really change their behavior and then invest in this. And I think here at like Tilt, we really try to capture this with the climate action points and really also thinking about engagement and also capacity building so that they understand what they actually could do to also finance mitigation and adaptation measures. But that's like still then on a voluntary basis, right? So it might be that like banks are caring about their reputation, are caring about their risks, but it's maybe not enough. So here, I think like at the end, maybe we also still need to think about financial regulations and about forcing the financial institutions to shift. So yes, I think you are right in this point.
Still, we need ourselves as human beings really to involve in every aspect of it and to really think, what should we do more? Because AI would become this. Yeah.
I would like to add on this point that in the end, there's never ever been a silver bullet to solve everything, and innovation is never a single cause like mechanism. It's dynamic, and it needs individual actors of various fields, various perspectives, various instruments to sort of ideally align and then like trigger virtuous circles that enable a change and a shift. And I think what we are working on in that context is one of the like 1,000 pieces that need to move. And we're raising the bar for some of the expectations on where to move, but we do not provide the solutions.
Maybe one anecdote that this has nothing to do with NLP or financial regulations because I don't understand it. But climate tech for me is also like a little bit broader than the topic that we discussed tonight. And being part of the AI community, some people were thinking about like how can we use AI in a way to raise awareness. And I remember like maybe 3 or 4 years ago, there was a workshop on climate change and AI. And people came up with really creative ways of like putting your personal house into a climate disaster zone. And so this visual context really triggers people and like really enforces like what happens with climate change. You can, for example, put like a very beautiful house on a beach into a storm with floods. And so people can, it's not like just Photoshop, but it looks really photorealistic. You can put houses into a hurricane disaster zone. And so that really, they showed these pictures to actual humans and they were shocked by it. And like, you can move people, you can create emotions. And I think this is also like part of a climate tech for me to raise awareness and raise critical thinking on this.
Yeah, I think we have time for one more question from the audience, and then it's wrap up time. So yeah, go take it away.
Thank you. I've stolen that mic. So to us, first of all, thanks for the great presentation. I have maybe a practical question, Julia, and looking at your work at the geography, I assume you're dealing with multiple languages. I mean, or at least supposed to. So then what challenges have you faced because of that, especially taking into account that climate jargon is just evolving and translations could be noisy, but also you have the cultural context. I mean, one statement in Dutch English could be a commitment, while in British English it could be nothing. I mean, what challenges been there?
Yeah, it's actually one of the core issues. So we haven't worked in various languages yet because of exactly the points that you raised. So it's very context specific, and it's also it's not only context specific in terms of the information, but also the way how information is presented. So we have requests from, for example, supervisors in Japan or in France, but they said like, okay, but it's going to be Japanese reports or it's going to be French reports. And I was in Japan some half a year ago, and it was so clear that the communication is so different. So we decided, no, we're not gonna touch that for the moment because we don't think it's reliable. So what we said is if people come up with experts who are able to label the data as we did before and train an individual model on that, we are happy to do that, but not just with a simple translation. That's also a pity because it restricts our sample to, for example, the MSCI World Index, which are the largest companies worldwide listed on equities, on stock exchanges. So, and they all issue annual reports in English. So that's why we could cover them. But yeah, it's a limitation that we did not touch yet.
Amazing. So I think we're coming to the close of this wonderful event, but maybe it's more the beginning rather than the end. Both in terms of please for everyone here, I would love if you will stick around for some drinks and some pizza to continue the conversation, but also hopefully the beginning of a wider discussion about how we grow this nascent community around NLP and its impact and potential for climate solutions. So this is my final shameless plug. Please follow Briink on LinkedIn as well as CCAI for more great kind of content around this intersection. And also, as I said, would love if everyone sticks around so we can talk more about this topic and how to grow the community. So I think without further ado, then one more round of applause for our absolutely excellent panel. Thank you to our online audience for coming, and thank you all to the audience here today. It's been a real pleasure to have you, and I hope it's been interesting. So yeah, thanks. One more round of applause. Let's drink some pizza that way. Thank you. Wow, thanks, guys. Wow, it's great fun. We actually finished.